Natalie gave me a challenge and I was happy to accept it. I do have intermediate level students. I enjoy teaching them as much, in fact, as I enjoy teaching college students. They are making progress, which is a good sign. They are happy, they seem happy. Of course, then I am happy, their parents are happy. So it seems like I'm doing the right thing, right? Um, so the challenge was how can I explain all that I do in 40 minutes? And I'll try to do my best here. I know that many of you already use many of these techniques, so I know that they're not all completely new, but I want to show how I guide intermediate students through the bridge. But many times in the real world, they do not see that bridge. They see this bridge, a bridge that is almost that has no end, full of obstacles, and just the length scares anyone, right? And that's when, if they are looking at this, they for sure will get discouraged and probably they will quit. Our role as educators, as teachers, is to make them believe that the bridge is still this small. So, in other words, we should set smaller goals so that they can go over many different bridges and then feel successful about them. Before we get into specifics, I want to show you the many phases of learning, or the many stages of learning. And here you can see the motivational level dropping drastically at stage 2. That's when the student finally realizes, oh mommy, I need to practice. Do I really need to practice? And that's when things start going badly. They don't want to do it now, they want to do it later. Another drop in motivation level is when stage 4 hits. That's when they say, well, why can't I just play good music? Why can't I play just rock or pop? And that's when they have more homework at school. That's when they have more extracurricular activities at school. That's when they want to be accepted by their friends. And that's when they become intermediate students. They get so discouraged that many, in fact, end up quitting. Right? They don't like piano anymore. It's too difficult. Too many things to do. But if they hang on to it, as you see on stage 6, they might be successful. The problem is between the ages of 11 through around 15. What do we do with them? How can we make them interested in piano again? So if they get through this phase, they'll be fine for the advanced level. Our question is, how can we make them graduate from the intermediate level before they quit? So I thought, before we get really into more specifics, I wanted to show, or I googled it. I did not know really how to explain what an intermediate level student is like. So I got this online, okay, from a site. And the first thing it says is has memorized and is able to play all both major and harmonic minor scales from memory at a decent speed. Also plays arpeggios in both the major and minor forms. The intermediate level student has some basic reading skills where she or he can read many easy pieces but struggle with reading more complex material such as 4-part harmony. The student has started to build a basic understanding of musical topics such as sonata form, rubato, trills, and voicing. And finally, the student has heard of and played a piece by Scarlatti or Haydn. Of course, the list is huge, but I thought there are a few words here that I want to highlight today, and I would like to focus on these words, which all have to do with music theory. Of course, the rest is super important, but I think they probably should be a topic for another presentation. So let's focus on the music theory part, because that's at least what I do with my students. In my opinion, music theory is the solution. Music theory will offer them the skills to read better, to sight read better, and to learn their pieces more efficiently. So we'll go through this list that I prepared for you, and let's move on to the first item. First, of course, we have to know what our students know. And by the way, I'm looking forward to John Peterson's presentation, How to Make Music Theory More Fun. And I'm sure he will contribute to this, and I will learn a lot from him as well. But this is what I do right now, okay? So how do we assess our students? How do we know what they know and what they do not know? So what I do is a diagnostic test. What I do, I use the sample tests by VMTA, which are great, and I will explain more about them, okay? So what I do, the first thing is to set or ask them to do the test at the very beginning of this the year or in the fall, and then based on that, I set goals for them for the whole year to fill in the gaps and see finally what they do not know and teach what they do not know. So this is just very quickly an example of the very first level, the primer level. As you see, it's not scary at all. It's about note values, rests, letter names, very simple stuff. And many times I think people are very intimidated by those tests, and even the word test intimidates you, right? But if you really see how simple this is, I'm sure more students would love to take this test, okay? So anyway, this is primer level, but this is more like intermediate level. This is from a real student that I have, and I finally realized that this student did not really know a lot of stuff, and starting with what the concept of melodic is as opposed to harmonic. So question 3, they missed it. They just did not know how to circle the melodic intervals. So of course I made a note on the top of their exam or on my notes that what I should really teach them. This is one of them. The other student did not even know, the order of sharps for the first question, for question 9, I mean, which I was shocked. We think that they know, and what we say already stays with them. It doesn't, right? So I learned also that they do not know or did not know about the tempo markings. And I had to also work on eventually what a whole step is and a half step are, based on how you really represent them on the score on the staff. And that's what this student did not know. So what did I do? Of course, we always go online and find ways to teach them concepts, and this one was a great one. For the student, worked with the visual of showing them what the tempo markings are. And of course, depending on the student, you have to vary this, right? Not every student learns the same way. So with those students that need more hands-on, instead of just visual, you might want to sing with them, you might want to walk with them in the room, especially for those who are hyper, right? You have to do something with them physically. Or for those very creative ones, you might ask them to draw images and figures that represent all these tempo markings. Moving on, then there's a listening portion, which is excellent. This is also intermediate level, level 2B. And by the way, you have a few of these on your handout, right? So I wrote there down where you can find them on your handout, page 4. So as an example, they would have on question C to identify either a major second or a perfect fourth interval. And that's it. Very easy, very basic, okay? Or they have to recognize either a major third or a perfect fifth. Very simple. Question E, whole steps and half steps. Very easy. And finally, question F, which my students actually missed the second one, but the first one, they got it right. They will hear a sample being played twice, and they have to really indicate if they hear, if what they are circling is exactly what they hear. For question B, probably they missed it because I believe the interval should be something like this, right? A very small detail that makes, in fact, they could not hear that. So anyway, I try to fill in the gaps with them. Okay, so this is just an example of what a listening test is like. Well, students need your support, but we also need some support. How can we make this happen? Of course, presentations like this help, but I believe that we should go to books. And for me, this is one excellent book, which comes with a CD-ROM, and it contains a lot of things that you can use in your studio, including practice charts that can be personalized. You can change things around. You know, it's all in electronic files, so very easy to personalize them and according to each student's needs. You know, setting goals for each week. They can get a practice chart for each week, and they will know what to do on that. If you really like that things should be that organized, there are many ways to do it. You can just write them on the notebook, but I do not really use the book for that. I use the book for what is highlighted in red here. But before we get there, I have to mention that also the book also shows a lot of ideas on how to promote your studio, which is a very important thing for all of us. Anyway, technique charts. And why do I pick this? Because, of course, they have to do with what I talked about in the beginning of this presentation, which is I need them to know, or I have to teach them scales, strides, and chord progressions. That's my first way of making them successful for piano. There are 9 levels, and this technique chart is a great example. This is level 1, the very first one. It's very well organized. You see check boxes, you see boxes that you have to check with a check mark, or they have to check with a check mark for every day they practice. Very organized, I love this. And I always circle a few keys for the week. I don't do everything. I do maybe the first one if I'm starting with the concept, and I keep going further and further, circling more and more as they progress. Eventually they have to play all that in about 4 minutes, and that will be their test to finally go to the next level. Anyway, let's concentrate on the intermediate level. Of course, things get a little harder, but again, you start from zero, you start from smaller bridges, you don't overwhelm them with everything. This took a while until finally my student could do this one. Scales, not only with 8th notes, but as well with triplets. And again, I maybe start with just the C major, or the C major is too hard. I start with the B major first, right? I like when the keys, when the scales have more sharps or flats. Anyway, again, all this to show how this will help our students have a goal in mind, and then how to accomplish that goal. For me, the most important is right here at the very bottom. The broken triads, which we'll be using when sight reading and when learning a piece, and the chord progressions. I hope I'm not going too fast. It's just a lot to cover, and I want to make sure that I cover and I mention everything. Well, with all those concepts that we are teaching them for what we call technique, of course, technique involves much more than just teaching them chords, right? You have to talk about posture, about hand position, about how to play scales, the right way to cross or not cross your thumb under, and so all of that stuff. But let's concentrate on the sight reading here. If I show you this phrase, which is actually a phrase written by Mozart, which of course will be another topic for a whole presentation. But he says, music is not in the notes, but in the silence between. We all read like that, right? Our students even might be reading like that already. But what happens when they have to sight read? Well, that's not that easy anymore. Our eyes, of course, have to be way ahead in order to read this fluently. We all know that, we all do it. It's because, of course, we recognize the words, not the letters. We recognize the words. And this is what is lacking when they sight read. If they try to sight read, they probably do like this. Music is not. Music is not in, right? And then it keeps going like that. They keep going back, and what they are doing is not really reading, they are decoding. They are deciphering everything on the spot. They do not have the ability or the right technique to read, right? They have to be taught on how to read and how to recognize patterns, how to recognize words. So in my opinion, the only way to do it is through making them understand that the music is full of patterns. So they all know, we tell them this every single time. You can't stop, you can't go back, you can't go back and glue nose together. Eyes go forward to the right. But why do they still stop and go back? They all do, right? I mean, we have even college students doing this, right? So what is the problem here? We'll get there, but I wanted to show a grading sheet for the Virginia Music Teachers test. This is for the sight reading test. And look how this prepares them for the test. First, it starts with 7 questions, basic questions. What is the time signature? What's the key signature? What's the interval on the first measure? And so on. So if they get that right, they get already 15 points for the first piece out of 50. It's huge, right? So we have to, of course, do that system with them. We have to ask them questions constantly, not only for sight reading, but also for when they learn a piece. But this is just to prepare them for the real world and also for this theory test. But I circled the most important here thing for me is they get points for the right rhythm, up to 12 points. They also get points for correct notes, of course, for fingering as well, and also for articulation, if it's staccato or legato. But I think the most important, and that's how I start with them, if they know that they can get 15 points for the questions and 12 points for rhythm, they already get the majority of the points for sight reading. That's how, they get 27 points total out of 50. It's more than half. If they play all the fingering right and articulation, they pass the theory test. So what I do with them, I ask them to sight read this, but what I tell them is this: if rhythm is worth 12 points, so what I do with them is, and I'm going to show you, I show it first, of course, right? So I'm playing this, and when rhythm matters, right? 12 points. So they do this. And it's a mess, but it's right? They pass. And this is what we have to make them believe. I mean, it's easy, right? This is the bridge, the small bridge that they have to cross. And they all can do it, right? I mean, if there's an issue with not reading a quarter note or, not knowing the concept of quarter and eighth notes, we ask them to tap, we ask them to clap. But they will be ready to play this with no problems when it comes to rhythm. Of course, we want them to do more, right? So how do we get them to do more? Of course, we help them to take a look, and a good look, at the music. And we ask those questions that they will be asked during the test. What is the time signature? What's the key signature? And then the questions prepare them, and this is what we should do also as teachers. Prepare them for what's coming up. They don't want to have surprises, right? It's very easy. What intervals do you see in measure 1 on the right hand, right? They know, okay, it's seconds. Okay, that will be easy. But the question is, what intervals do you see in measure 4? And believe me, most of them will miss measure 4 because they will not see that skip there, right? So they all will play something like measure 4 and they'll miss it. If we ask them ahead of time, if they're prepared for it, if they're anticipating it, they'll get it right? And they'll play with the B flat there as well, if they know the key signatures, and more importantly, if they have been doing this in technique, if they have been doing this constantly, as chord progressions, scales or pentascales. They have to be able to find this actually familiar, right? In other words, what we have to teach them is how to see shapes, even though the shapes are somehow hidden. What shapes do you see here, right? There are two. One is kind of hidden, but you can still tell it's a triangle. So how do we do this in sight reading? Going back to our Alexander March, finding shapes or patterns. So if it smells like a chord, if it looks like a chord, then it must be a chord, right? And this is what I asked them to do. For sure, they have to play chord progressions here first, right? They will be doing. But then before they read, I teach them or I point them to measure 3 right away, and I see, okay, this is a dominant chord, right? By now they know this is a dominant. But I say, well, can you find that shape, or let's say this is a triangle, which for me looks even like a triangle on your hand, right? Sometimes I teach geometric forms with their hand. I say this is a triangle, so the 3 fingers form a triangle. So let's find out if there is a triangle that is hidden here, and then they point out to measure 6. Of course, things will be changing here regarding the next chord, but this one still can be considered a triangle, right? It's just one note missing. And then I ask them what else they see, what else on this piece they can really find the same kind of triangle. They will go to measure 11, which of course looks like, but it's just broken. And finally, they'll point to measure 13 as well, right? So that, again, you have to make it easy. You have to start making them think in patterns. I'm not letting you speak, but we'll have a discussion at the very end, okay? So hold your questions to the end. So anyway, we have to make them believe that there are lots of chunks of music that they have to see, lots of patterns in any piece of music. They have to identify chords and chord progressions that will make their lives much easier. And another important point, which I'll be discussing later, especially when learning a piece, is what I call outlining. It actually doesn't come from me. That's not a term that I actually created, but it's by a very great educator, Abby Whiteside, and I'll show more about that later. Anyway, you can just play the downbeats maybe, if you cannot really do everything, or your eyes have to be going to every single downbeat, and that's it. Everything else you can ignore, or everything else you can play wrong, as long as the downbeats are there, right? So you can maybe do something like this. First measure, second measure, third measure, fourth measure. And if anything happens in between, that's fine. So if I do something like this, of course they'll be reading much slowly, which is fine. Sight reading does not have to be fast, as long as it is your eyes are going to the next measure, right? So they could do something like this. So they don't know anything, but they come back to second measure, third measure. Doesn't matter what they do. Fourth measure, right? I mean, they have to start looking at chunks or at pillars, and those pillars will help them finally survive through this piece. It will be, I'll show more later, this will make more sense, okay? Now, start with simple. Well, is this simple? Yes, if you think of patterns, this is very simple. It's a hand-on exercise. Can you find a pattern? That's what you ask them. Well, I don't ask them to read note by note. If they do note by note, they're not doing the right thing, okay? What I ask them to do is just to concentrate on whatever is the sequence or that pattern that they found, right? Even by the fingering, they know that it seems like every measure is the same pattern that keeps repeating but going up. Well, if they are prepared like this to look at this as patterns and outlining this, therefore they know that the right hand will play a C on the first measure, second measure will be a D, third measure will be an E. they will easily find that where does the change occur in this piece? Where does the pattern change? Well, many of you will be saying, well, the last line. But you know what? There's a mistake on this music. And they will catch it if they really are looking at the first note only. You're seeing actually here that it goes to C, then there's a D on this measure, and then there's another D on this measure. Okay? It's probably a typo, right, for this edition, but it's there. And you only will be able to catch this if you're looking at outlining. If you're looking note by note, once you get there, you are going to miss it completely. So sight reading is of course finding patterns that are similar, but also what deviates from that pattern. Well, it takes 10,000 hours of directed practice to become highly skilled in many activities. Sight reading is no exception. If their sight reading skills improve, of course their learning skills will improve. So this is where my concept of what we should do in order to prepare them for both. So I just listed a few materials for you for sight reading. You have like 4, and of course there are many more. The basic idea is to make it simple for them. Remember, small bridges. The easiest way is really to ask them to go to old methods and that are 2 levels below their current level, and that could be their sight reading for the entire year, right? Always 2 levels below their level. Or you can of course have all these different ideas. Bastian normally has preparatory exercises before each piece, which also can be used as sight reading, or there's a collection, a line a day, that also works really well. Anyway, I'll go quickly through this because you can check on this on your own, okay? There is the 4-star sight reading and year tests. Prepare them for a sight reading test. Outlining chords. There are lots of activities here. Rhythmic drills, which we should do with them as well. We could do rhythmic drills just like I did, right, on the piano with super wrong notes, but that's also fun, right? Or you can actually set goals to them or parameters, right? You can say, okay, let's do this on a triad, and you're only going to play the C major triad, right? Or only playing the C major pentascale, but with the right rhythm, and so on. Then there's this one by Helen Marley and Kevin Olson, 10 leveled books. You also have it on your handout. And finally, this complete series of sight reading and ear tests. Quite dry, but it prepares you for the Royal Conservatory of Music examinations in sight reading and oral skills through grade 10. So also another great source here and great materials for you to use. Let's move on. Now, getting to pieces. And we normally say practice makes perfect. Well, does it? Does it really make perfect? I think what you have to remember is smart practice makes perfect. And this is what we're going to concentrate on. Practice for sure involves repetition, but repeating a passage without a goal is useless. Besides, it creates muscle and mind fatigue. My tip is, before you repeat a session or a phrase over and over again, try to find as many patterns as possible. We're going back to the smaller bridges here, okay? So, first, that's what I tell my students, find the bones first, right? Even my college students, I say bones sometimes and I say columns sometimes, but find the bones, the structure of what you are analyzing or you want to perform. And it's just like solving a puzzle, right? Again, even if you did not have all the concept right there, all the labels, the first one says root position, the second measure says first inversion, the students have to be able to do this and recognize this right away, because they will be playing this all the time, right? So you say, what does this look like? Well, it's the C major triad. Great, on the right hand. You don't ask them to play everything. They just concentrate maybe on one hand, and then later they will see that the other hand mirrors it, right? So they have to be able to, like, oh, as soon as they look, they are not even playing yet, right? They are looking, they are anticipating. They will be able to look at this piece and memorize it in if they are well trained, in maybe 1 minute, right? Because everything is about the same. They just go through the different chords, the tonic, subdominant, and dominant, and they'll be able to play this at the first lesson by memory if they are trained the right way, by learning how to see the patterns and how to cross these smaller bridges. And then going back to this that I showed before, this is exactly what I think is the most important. It's just, the fact that they are learning triads and then broken triads. Of course, they're learning the technique part of it, learning how to really do it the best way possible, technically speaking, but also they are learning the concept here, and they will be able to show that here or on this next piece. The Ballade by Bergmüller, a favorite of our students. Before I do anything, I ask them to add measure numbers, especially now when we are teaching online, right, virtually. We need to, of course, identify the chords or identify the measures very quickly. So it saves a lot of time if they number at least the first line measure, so that we know what measure we are talking about here when we mention that to them. Then this is the first lesson, or even we do this at the lesson before they practice. I ask them to circle chords, very easy task, right? Very small bridge. And then compare those chords. Again, remember the triangle I showed? What looks like a triangle but is not really showing the triangle completely. Measure 1 for sure, with the C minor triads. But then when you go to measure 19, still there, measure 20, something happens there. But it seems like it's just one note missing, is the triangle again, right? So they have to find all this on their own, and they will, believe me. Measure 24, many times, so many students miss it, right? Measure 24 to 26. Why? First, they are learning note by note. Second, they probably are using bad fingering, right? For me, this is not the best fingering to use. For me, I make this more fun. They all love to cross hands, right? You have to make them understand it's a pattern. You don't have to change the pattern. If you change the fingering like the book suggests, you're not doing a good job, or you're not helping the student really. So for me, they first learn before anything, right? It's the chord there, and then of course later, when they are ready to play it, they will for sure do this really well with no problems. And if they are already doing a good job with letter A or the section A, we go to section B. Again, you don't want to tell them, go learn this piece for next week, the whole thing right hand. I mean, that's not the right way to do it, okay? Go in parts, go in sections, set smaller goals. And believe it or not, I do this even with my college students, because I know that many will try to be overwhelmed and go all over and try to learn everything. It's not possible, okay? I don't do that, right? So why do they have to do that? And then we will show them that on section B, they also will find chords, recognize them, see, let's say, measure 39. And again, I study that with them. I make them play maybe just the C major chords, and then measure 39 and compare measure 39 with measure 43, right? Measure 39, measure 43. They have to know it's an inversion. And this tricky part from measure 39 until 40 something, everybody misses. I mean, they don't, of course, they completely ignore there's a poco ritenuto there, which might help them. But also they completely ignore that the chords are very similar to each other, right? The position, the D minor one, for example, measure 41 is the same as measure 42. And they do not see that unless they are prepared with theory, okay? Anyway, let's move on. Finding Waldo. This is what we have to do with them. Find Waldo. Of course, where is Waldo here? It's like, oh my gosh, they get overwhelmed, right? There's no way that you'll find Waldo that easily. But if Waldo is everywhere, makes your life much easier. And what I mean, Waldo is everywhere. Everything can be a chord. Many times the chord is the same. You just have to make them believe that it's all there, right? It's easy. Another example is this second movement of the Clementi Sonatina. And again, it's up to them, personalize your lessons. If your student is learning a lot of pieces all together, you might not want to ask them to do this in day 1, day 2, day 3, and day 4. You might want them to do this on week 1, week 2, or whatever, every 3 days or so is a different phase. But what I ask them to do is, first, again, circle the broken triads. That's the very first thing you have to do. Try to label them if they're at that stage. If you're not at that stage, they don't have to label it. As you see, measure 3, I circled measure 3. It is of course an F major chord. Of course it's a different version of F major. It's a different inversion, but I do not make it specifically with theory to make it more harder for them. It's fine if they just mark an F major there, okay, because it is an F major chord. And then I ask them to play what they circle. That's all they're going to do, right? So measure 1, they go to measure 3, they go to measure 4, they go to measure 5, and measure 6. And then they start hearing it harmonically, right? It's not just playing, they have to listen to it and listen to the chord progression, because it's a chord progression that they are used to, right? Again, always review things. You cannot just say, okay, learn this and play the right hand or play the left hand for me. That's too little, right? That's all they're going to do for the day. That's it, okay? Close the book. Of course, if they're more experienced, they might keep going, right? They might go to, solve the issues or solve the chords in measure 14, measure 16, and so on. But again, not ever overwhelm them. For day 2 or week 2, whatever you prefer, you review everything they did, and then you start finding more patterns, right? The yellow notes for me are the scales that eventually I'll ask them what the scales are. Again, they just only play the scales. They have to tell me if it's a C major scale, if it sounds like a F major scale, whatever it is, right? Finally, day 3, they review days 1 and 2, but they play the right hand alone finally. And at one point, I'll ask them to play on day 4, or whenever they're ready, the right hand together with circled broken triads on the left. Again, I don't ask them to play everything. I don't ask them to learn the right hand this week and then the next week learn the left hand next week. No. This probably after a few days or weeks, they'll be able to do this. I tell them that the right hand, by the way, has also pattern, right? They might have already found this, right? Again, it's an F major. And I ask them to just play the left hand as circled and then the right hand as it's written. So they're ready, of course, there is a chord that I missed there. It's up to you to decide if that C major is important right now. Of course, you can add it there as well, right? So anyway, they have to be able to play this and listen to the music, listen to the melody, listen to the line before they really venture themselves into doing everything that is written, okay? Let's move on because there is more here. So let's go back to the outlining topic. Outlining for Abby Whiteside is skipping notes while maintaining the basic rhythm. The basic rhythm, she explains, is the internal pulse that most of us have, right? Some of us might not, but most of us do have. It's something that helps us understand that, there's always a cycle. Everything is a cycle. Your hand is always gesturing, right? There's a gesture for every single line. There's a feeling that the phrase is going to breathe at one point, and that's what you have to get into, is the students making the students understand it's not note by note. Abby Whiteside talks about Hanon, which is the note by note procedure, which is not what we should be doing with the students when they play a piece or even learn a piece. In other words, what we have to do is to look at a puzzle and start from the borders, starting from the frame, and then trying to glue the pieces together later on in the middle, but for sure they will have a structure first, right? So my example here with the BC piece, which is very famous and very popular for the intermediate level. This is what I would ask them to do on day one. Outlining here, meaning I want them to play, probably I will be asking them first to identify the first note in each measure, as I circled, right? Second measure, third measure. And then of course, I have to tell them, you know, look at that, there are skips and it sounds like a A minor chord, right? Then we go to measure 5, 6 and 7. Okay, it's a C major triad, we know that, right? We forget about the left hand, which eventually will be a challenge. We don't care about that yet. Well, I asked them to circle things that will help them play this much better. Measure 12, right, and then measure 13, and then measure 14, which breaks the pattern, right? So there are patterns that are similar, and then what breaks the pattern will also help them memorize, right? So they have a G twice, they have an A out of nowhere. So what do? Then I ask them to play this, counting and feeling that they are really doing this as part of a line, right? So I'll go 1 and 2 and 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 we stop there. Again, we don't do the whole piece, we don't have to. Eventually I'll ask them to do the same for measure 13 when they are ready with both hands. And by the way, they also have, for me everything is theory, they have to analyze the relation between the left and the right hands and know, oh, it's a perfect fifth. Next measure, oh, it's a perfect fifth. Next measure, oh, it is a perfect fifth, even though it changes, right? Finally, they have to play 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. I give them the fingering, right? At this stage, it's better to just write them down right away. And I say, okay, this is what you have to do, right? Can you play just what is read for next week or for your first day of practice? Depends again on their level of ability and how small a bridge you want it to be. And eventually measure 26 has of course a chord that is circled, and they have to know the chord is there, right? Hopefully playing it with the right fingers. And again, there are many fingerings here. That's just a suggestion, my own suggestion. Anyway, this is day one, okay? Then what do we do for day two? Well, then we start adding to this outlining, right? And this is all they're going to do. So I said, okay, let's just learn one more note. 1 and 2 and 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 notice that I'm actually never just playing the notes as many would, like, and then they're very tense and then go to the next one. No, you have to make them understand that it's already a gesture and the basic rhythm is at work here, right? The impulse, the feeling that there is a circle going on inside of you, right? And your ears too. Things are repeating, right? It's a cycle. It's a circle. It's a wheel that's spinning. So remember that too. That's it. Maybe if the student is pretty good or is doing well, measure 13, of course, I can do that. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and adding just one note, okay? And then for the B section, maybe I'll say, okay, let's just find out what's happening here on measure 22. Only play the yellow. right? And again, they have to get it in their ears. They have to be able to do this, study intervals. Oh, it's an F major. Oh, wow, cool. Yeah, I know that. They'll be doing that with no problems, right? And then, oh, it's like a stepwise motion, like a scale. Great, okay, I know that. So again, keep it simple, right? This is day 2. What do I do for day 3? Well, things started getting more complicated, but still, it's because they have done day 1 and day 2. I'm not mentioning the left hand, but I'm doing the same thing. I'm asking them to do the same thing for the left hand, right? Basic columns, just bones, right? You're not playing everything. Even though they want to play everything, and they probably will be doing that already. But again, have a structure, ask them little bits, little chunks at first. So day 3 will be 1 and 2 and 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 1. Right? And then, oh, it's the same now. Great. It's just an octave lower or 2 octaves lower. 1 and 2 and 1 and 1 and 2 and right? So it makes it much easier for them. Okay? You are helping them play those chunks. Finally, I start, well, maybe they are ready for measure 13 and to play clusters, right? So of course, a great way to introduce clusters if they do not know yet, but then you're going to make them play all that together, and again, with the same basic rhythm, right? With the same kind of feeling of impulse or inside, right? Circle, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, right? Again, you make that not only once, and they cannot just like, oh, I got it, and they really don't have it. They have to have this inside and feel it's a gesture, right? It's not really just notes, it's a gesture. Finally, I want to finish with the last example. Finally, day 4, or as whatever you want to do for your students, is to start maybe playing a line. So they will be able to play the right hand already with the right fingering. And if they are successful in doing that, they might add a little bit of the left hand, which they're also practicing on their own, adding, right? Every week or every day they add something. But this is all I would like them to do, is just to play those chords. And the only chords they're playing, of course, they already analyzed, by the way, measure 3. They have to know the relation between those two hands. Oh yeah, it's a D minor. Wow, that's great. I know a D minor. And then measure 5, right? That with this. Oh, it's a C minor. I know C minor. So they already are prepared for a D minor and a C minor, right? So 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 2. Oops, sorry, I don't know how to count, right? 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and right? You go simple, you go with little things, and probably not this fast. I mean, I'm probably playing too fast for now for them, okay? Make them believe that they can do it. Anyway, you might have questions, but let me just finish by reviewing, as we should always do with our students. Simplify. Simplify, students should go through shorter bridges. Break sections into easier to play chunks, always, even if it's just one chunk. So what? They will be successful at that, right? What else? Set easier goals. Find patterns, and for me this is really the way of teaching. At least that's what I do with my students. And play downbeat, sometimes outlining the music. So where are you when it comes to the bridge? Of course, I have to show this is a bridge in São Paulo. I have to show a Brazilian picture here, but you are the support for this bridge, okay? The bridge might take the students everywhere, and that's why they need directions and they need a map, but you will be providing the support for them, okay? So if you are the support for the bridge, well, what can you do? Yes, if they want to play hymns, pop, jazz, movie themes, why not? In fact, those are the great examples of pieces that use a lot of chord progressions and chords that they do know. So why not? For sure. If that's what they want to play, let them play, right? Besides that, ask them to find patterns on their own, right? If they already can do that, and they can, ask them to circle it on the score. Many do not circle anything, uh, including college students. We tell them something, there's no fingering marked. I mean, if my piece, even though I know what finger that is, I have to write it down. That note plays that finger. Because at one point I'll feel nervous, and just the fact that I had seen that, right, visually on the paper, and I have discussed it and talked about it or practiced with knowing, oh, this is finger one. If I said it once, that will help me play this piece better, and in fact might save me if I have a problem with performance anxiety. Okay. Then assign weekly homework. I know we have only a few students sometimes are 30 minutes, see us for 30 minutes, sometimes for 40 minutes, but I really feel that we have to divide up our time with them and assign them homework, and then talk about their homework and the next lesson, including theory and sight reading, really. And finally, review often. About performance opportunities for them, you have to enroll them everywhere you can. EMU Festival is a great one for sure, but even ask them to play as a prelude at church, right? I mean, ask them to record on now via Zoom or whatever, and then send it to their church minister and the music minister, and then who knows, maybe they'll be featured. That will give them so much pleasure, and also they'll be proud that they can actually do that. So I really recommend that. My students have done that actually. Of course, some of us are already doing this. Zoom recital, live broadcast. David did a great one just last week. And Laurie already mentioned our JMU Junior Audition Day. And again, even if you have a freshman in high school, send them. That's totally fine. If they are interested in seeing what an audition day is like. If they want to play, they don't have to play. If they want to play, I'll be happy to listen to them. If they don't want to play, they can take part in the activities we'll have for them there. Okay, it's very informal, very casual. And then keeping updated. Okay, attend HMTA meetings, just like this one is a good one. But I believe that a great one is join the VMTA. I know it's expensive. Believe me, honestly, I do it just because of the theory tests. That's why I'm doing my membership right now. I'm not taking part in the conference. I mean, I haven't gone in conferences for a while. Of course, they are not even possible now, but I think they are very expensive. You get a lot when you go to them. I love them, of course, but you spend about $1,000 at least if you talk about the registration, the hotel, the expenses, traveling, and so on, food. But theory tests, I think that's the best for you. Why? Well, you have someone else to grade your students. It will set a goal for them. You can download everything from the internet, right, from their website, to prepare your students for the tests. And it's a goal that they will have. It's a bigger goal than your weekly assignments and then your smaller bridges, but this is a bigger bridge that I really believe that all of them should have and should cross. And of course, we have the American Music Teacher magazine. I just got mine for this month, and it has a great article on essential customer service skills for independent studio owners. Let me say it again: essential customer service skills for independent studio owners. So very interesting article. This is only one of them. I mean, and there's also an interview with one of the greatest composers, American composers now, Lieberman. So there's an interview with him, Lowell Lieberman. So that's another thing that you're going to see on this magazine. Okay, so, and lastly, observe a lesson via Zoom. Really, I'm totally fine if you ever want to observe any of my lessons, either for intermediate level or for my college students, and I'm sure my colleagues also will be happy to have you observe their lessons. It's free, it's via Zoom, you don't have even to leave from your house, and I'll be more than happy than if you just sit in and just observe. okay? So we'll have to let them go all the way to the end, and they will graduate, okay? We just have to work a little harder on try to make this easy and pleasant for them. So again, if you need any more, if you have any questions, concerns, or just send me an email. I'll be happy to reply and to talk to you. So let's open it up for discussion. I'll close this.